It was the last Friday of June, and I, Wesley Mercer, had just finished work for the summer. I was looking forward to 4 weeks off. On my way home, I swung by my in-laws' place to pick up Gwen, my 7-year-old. My daughter had been staying with them during her school break until Felicia, my wife of 9 years, and I both began our vacation this year. There were no grand plans for a trip or exotic trips booked or big adventures mapped out. Instead, we agreed to focus on some much-needed maintenance around the house. Felicia suggested it, and I went along with the idea. We figured we'd fit in a few short day trips here and there, depending on the weather. Felicia usually finished work by noon, so Gwen and I were excited to see her. We expected a warm homecoming full of celebration and family fun. Sure enough, Felicia's blue Ford Fiesta was parked outside. As we walked into the house, we saw Gwen's car in the driveway, just like we'd expected. But when we went inside, Gwen was shouting, "Mom, we're home." We didn't hear a response at first. I just assumed Felicia had gone to visit a neighbor. I tried to calm Gwen down and told her, "Mom's probably just stepped out for a bit. She'll be back soon." But as time went on and we noticed there were no signs of preparations, no groceries, no decorations, it became clear something was off. This wasn't what Felicia had planned that morning, that much I could tell. Then I started thinking maybe she's out with her coworkers. I thought maybe she was at a last-minute celebration for the upcoming holidays, but what threw me was the lack of any heads up. Normally, we'd let each other know if one of us was going to be late, whether by call or text. 2 hours passed and still not a word from Felicia. My initial worry had deepened. I began calling her friends and colleagues trying to figure out where she could be. None of them had any information that could help. At her job, they had wrapped up for the summer break with a coffee break at 11:00, allowing everyone to head home. No one had seen Felicia make any special plans for the day, and her friends were just as clueless as I was. I didn't reach out to her parents. They would have told me if they knew anything. When I picked up Gwen earlier, the one thing I knew for certain was that Felicia had been home after work. Her car keys were hanging on their usual hook by the door, right where she always left them. There was no post, there was no note on the fridge, no text message, nothing. It was another oddity since we always noted if our plans changed unexpectedly. Ours was a solid marriage, not perfect, but not worse than most we'd met 11 years ago at a party, and 9 years of marriage later I'd never once been unfaithful, nor had I ever suspected Felicia of cheating. We had our share of typical disagreements, but nothing major. There were no money problems, no health scares, and from my perspective, a healthy sex life. Felicia had always assured me she was content and that if she ever wanted something different, she'd let me know. Still, I held on to the hope that she'd walk through the door that evening, ready with a reasonable explanation for the day's confusion. As the hours dragged on, though, that hope started to fade. By the time morning came, I was so tired I just went to bed, hoping I'd find Felicia there when I woke up. But when the morning light came, she was still not there. I suddenly realized something was very wrong. I called her parents and close friends, but they didn't know more than we did the day before. Her parents and sister were understandably worried. They kept calling me every hour, despite my promise to reach out if there was any news. After lunch, I went to the police. They told me to stay calm and reassured me that in most cases, people who go missing during the summer turn up after a few days back at home. I was trying to figure out what had happened to Felicia. As the days went by, more and more unsettling details emerged. Some of her clothes were gone, along with a suitcase, her laptop, her medication, and even her passport. It didn't make sense. There was still no message from her, no hint of what she was doing. The more I looked into it, the more I realized I had no idea where Felicia could be or why. I checked the account, but there was nothing unusual. The log of incoming and outgoing calls to our landline didn't give me any clues about what Felicia had done. I also checked our joint bank account, but I couldn't find anything helpful. I didn't have access to her accounts, so I couldn't look at them. I couldn't access her cell phone records, but her passport was missing, so I doubted she'd left the country. Many of her personal items were still at home, so I had an idea. If Felicia was nearby, she could return to the house while Gwen and I were away to grab whatever else she needed. I couldn't stop her from coming back, but I could gather proof of her visit. I went to the electronics store and bought 2 video cameras, one small and discreet enough to hide indoors, and the other better suited for outdoor surveillance. The indoor camera was motion activated and could record sound, and it was strategically positioned to cover. There was no way around it. The entire entryway was covered, whether someone came through the front or back door. The outdoor camera captured my driveway, snapping 10 photos per minute. This allowed me to review the footage quickly each day. Those days were a nightmare for both Gwen and me. I tried to reassure her, telling her I tried to reassure Gwen that Mom would call or come home, but I was as surprised as she was. I was having trouble sleeping, filled with the relentless question of where Felicia was and why she'd done this to us. It was one thing for a wife to leave her husband, but for a mother to abandon her 7-year-old daughter? A year Felicia just vanished without a word. It was so strange, especially since there were no signs that anything was wrong. I thought about it a lot, but I still didn't know what happened. Then, on Wednesday, something happened. A policewoman named Tessa Larson called me and asked to meet. I'll be there at the time and place you specify. She replied quickly, in 10 minutes at your house. Playing the good cop, she asked if it was okay to use first names, Tessa and Wesley. I didn't have any objections, but I wasn't convinced this charming woman would accomplish much in the search for my wife. Still, I decided to be polite and asked if she'd like to look around the house first or talk. She opted for a tour. I popped Gwen's favorite DVD in the living room to keep her busy while Tessa and I sat at the kitchen table waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. She started off by going over her plans for the case, then switched gears. She said, "In cases like this, I'm on your side as long as you're honest with me. But if you lie to me, you'll be in trouble. We're in a bit of a pickle. Can we agree to work with the truth?" Her smile softened her words, but the message was clear. I understood that husbands often weren't as innocent as they claimed in such situations, and Tessa clearly knew that. Of course, I agreed. I'll do everything I can to help solve this mystery. I assured her that she asked her questions, and I answered. In return, she promised to look into whether Felicia's phone had been used recently and check for any activity on her accounts. However, she warned me that with the summer holidays in full swing, things might not move as quickly as I would like. Tessa had no issues with the video cameras I had installed. Afterward, she had a brief friendly chat with Gwen, and as she was leaving, she turned to me with a look that made me think she knew something I didn't. She said she had a daughter the same age. I couldn't imagine how anyone could abandon a child. That comment reassured me that Felicia's disappearance would be treated with higher priority, but I also knew the drill in cases like this. The spouse was always the prime suspect. He'd spent months in jail just because they thought he was guilty, even though he wasn't. I had to trust that if I cooperated with Tessa, I wouldn't become the target. Unless, of course, they found something I wasn't expecting. On Thursday morning, Tessa showed up to collect Felicia's car for an investigation. By Friday, she was back at my place for a follow-up. During our conversation, she told me that Felicia's bank account hadn't seen any activity since she disappeared. I told her that my cameras hadn't captured anything either. Then Tessa surprised me with something unexpected. She said that there are only 2 explanations for Felicia's disappearance. Either some of my colleagues believe that you might be involved, or she has a strong reason to stay away from you and Gwen. That seemed strange to me, especially as a mother of a 7-year-old. I have an older daughter, too, Wesley. As I told you before, I'm on your side as long as you're being truthful. Her words made me wonder if Felicia had somehow set me up with fake evidence. I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I told Tessa about my concerns. She tried to reassure me, saying that Felicia wouldn't have done something like that. If anything, Felicia had likely left me with Gwen because she trusted me to take care of our daughter. Maybe she suggested it wasn't hatred or malice that drove Felicia away, but something else entirely. Perhaps even a passionate affair. If that were the case, Tessa speculated Felicia might eventually call. One of us was going to find out what was going on with Felicia within a few days. I had no idea what was going on in Felicia's mind. Tessa mentioned the media briefly, but she didn't seem too concerned just yet. Felicia had taken her suitcase and passport during the peak holiday season, so her absence wasn't enough to catch the media's attention. I also thought that publicity about the case might lead to a flood of useless tips from all over the country by Saturday evening. Felicia had been missing for 8 days, and we were no closer to finding her on Monday, the 10th day. Tessa and I had lunch together, and she told me that Felicia's smartphone had been turned off. While Tessa was helping out, some small clues were found in Felicia's car. Even though Tessa had some extra help, the leads weren't pointing anywhere specific yet. Wednesday marked 12 days of Felicia's absence. It also happened to be her mother's birthday. Gwen and I went over for a barbecue that evening. Felicia's brother-in-law, Magnus, had clearly stashed some alcohol in his car. He kept sneaking out for drinks. By the time he returned, he was noticeably intoxicated. I wasn't fond of Magnus, but he became a real nuisance. He started throwing accusations my way about Felicia's disappearance. In-law Magnus Lind had clearly stashed some alcohol in his car because he kept sneaking out for drinks. By the time he returned, he was noticeably intoxicated, even when he was sober. I wasn't fond of Magnus, but he became a real nuisance, especially when he started throwing accusations my way about Felicia's disappearance despite his wife and in-laws. Laws tried to calm him down, but they couldn't keep Magnus quiet. I was tired of it. I snapped at him, "One more word from you, Magnus, and you'll be picking yourself up off the ground." Magnus, in his drunken state, took a swing at me. He missed by a mile and ended up sprawled on the ground, out cold. I decided enough was enough and left the party, taking Gwen with me on our way home. We stopped by a supermarket that was still open. I stopped by the supermarket to pick up a few essentials and ran into an old friend. We ended up chatting for a while that night. Once Gwen was asleep, I checked the footage from the cameras. I was pretty blown away by what I saw. Felicia was clearly in the indoor footage, and she looked fine and healthy. The outdoor footage wasn't as sharp because of the rain, but I could make out the shape of a black Mercedes. I saw a Benz GLC pull into our driveway. Felicia had arrived alone, but unfortunately, the first 2 characters of the license plate were too blurry to make out. Tessa had given me her private number for emergencies, so I called her immediately. She agreed that these images were a big deal, but regrettably couldn't make it over that night. That night, I was in the same boat as Tessa, unable to leave Gwen, so we agreed to go over the pictures together the following day. I started wondering if Tessa was a single mother. She'd never mentioned a spouse, but that wasn't my concern. What mattered was that she seemed genuinely pleased by the news. Maybe the mystery would be solved soon. It'll probably be solved soon, or maybe she was relieved to know that her instincts about my innocence had been correct. It was likely a bit of both. The next morning, Tessa arrived early, looking pleased with the quality of the footage. "These recordings are even better than I expected," she said with a bright smile. "I'm glad. I had a feeling about you, even though some of my colleagues thought you were involved in Felicia's disappearance." I smiled back at Tessa, appreciating her concern. "I really appreciate all your help with this whole thing and your belief that we'll find the answers." I said we're not there yet, but hopefully soon. "What are your plans for Felicia if she comes back? Whatever happens, please don't do anything reckless. Neither to her nor to any man that might be involved. You don't want to create more problems you'll regret later. Promise me right now that you won't disappoint me." I shook my head, frustration simmering beneath the surface. I don't know what's going to happen to Felicia or her lover. I'll only give her a divorce so she can be completely free to live whatever life she wants. But why didn't she just ask for one in the first place? Why did she sneak off like this and make a mess of things for Gwen and me? You updated as soon as we found out more about that Mercedes and its owner. At this point, we just need to ask Felicia if she left on her own and why. If she did, she hasn't done anything illegal, though she certainly acted like a jerk towards her family. I knew right then that Felicia's case had dropped in priority. She was the police considered her a runaway, and from their perspective, it didn't seem like there was any foul play involved. They continued investigating the Mercedes, and out of the 8 potential matches, 6 were black, which is a popular color for that model. 4 of the owners lived far from our town, so they were ruled out for now. One of the remaining vehicles belonged to a 70-year-old. The retired vet, who was 70 years old, thought his 22-year-old grandson drove the car. In fact, the vet himself now drove a smaller Nissan. The grandson had apparently left with his new girlfriend for the coast. The old man was relieved to hear that the boy wasn't in trouble and had helped Tessa track him down. That left just one more possibility, a black Mercedes owned by a 39-year-old self-employed dentist. This guy was an employed dentist who lived in a newly built extravagant house in town. He had quite the reputation. Not only was he known as a slumlord, making a profit from rundown rental properties he'd bought at bargain prices, but he was also involved in local politics. There, he gained a reputation as a troublemaker. He had 2 children from his first marriage. His ex-wife had full custody. Currently, he was married to a member of parliament. She was conveniently on a tour. The dentist took a month-long taxpayer-funded trip to Singapore, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand to study communication issues in suburban areas. The kicker? It was just her and her party boss on this lavish trip, raising plenty of eyebrows. The tabloids and gossip magazines had their fun with the story, hinting at an affair between the two, though nothing was ever directly stated. Regardless, the dentist had become a laughingstock in town. Tessa called me one afternoon sounding frustrated. "We've hit a snag," she admitted. "The dentist, we found out that he owns a big summer house by a lake, but he says he isn't living there. The problem is that unless we have solid evidence that Felicia is there against her will, we can't legally enter the property. If he denies knowing her, we're stuck." But Tessa wasn't ready to give up just yet. She had a plan and needed my help to pull it off with the police, who are stretched thin due to summer holidays. Locating a woman who'd voluntarily left her family wasn't exactly high on their list of priorities, but if they could prove that Felicia was at the summer house, they could get a warrant to enter, even if the dentist tried to stop them. The plan was simple. One of Tessa's colleagues was a birdwatcher, and the next day I'd be using his equipment to stake out the summer house. From dawn to dusk, the birdwatcher and I were one and the same, so his camouflage gear fit me perfectly. He handed me 2 green plastic jugs, one for water and one for well and other necessities. He also gave me a camouflage net, a foldable lightweight ladder, and he even shared his tips on what food to bring for a long day in a tree. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I wrote up the divorce papers, dropped Gwen off at her grandparents' house, packed my food, and made sure my phone and the mini laptop Tessa had given me were fully charged. She reminded me to conserve the laptop's battery by avoiding unnecessary web browsing. The phone would be in standby mode, so that wouldn't be an issue, but I'd need to be cautious with everything else at 5. At 00 sharp on the 14th day of Felicia's disappearance, the bird-watching cop and I were deep in the woods overlooking the dentist's summer house. He pointed out the perfect maple tree, a sturdy perch with plenty of branches and leaves to keep me hidden. After a final rundown of instructions, I unfolded the ladder, climbed up, pulled the ladder after me, and settled in to construct my hideout. Meanwhile, the officer went off to set up an automatic camera facing the seaside, which wasn't visible from my position. Once he returned, he gave my setup a quick inspection and flashed a thumbs up before leaving. He set up an automatic camera facing the seaside, which wasn't visible from my position. Once he returned, he gave my setup a quick inspection, flashed a thumbs up, and left my seat. It turned out to be more comfortable than I expected. I got settled and sent a short text to Tessa, "All is well, 3G signal okay." 2 hours later, she replied with a brief "good luck." Things stayed quiet until about 7. At 30, a car stopped by the mailbox to deliver a newspaper. 20 minutes later, a man clad in nothing but red boxers came out to fetch it. I wasn't intimately familiar with the dentist, but I was fairly certain it was him. I snapped a few pictures and downloaded the clearest ones to the laptop. I sent them to Tessa, and she replied quickly, saying it was him. Well done. The next couple of hours passed uneventfully until a small white Volkswagen Caddy with bright blue and red Fresh Home logos pulled up outside. Two women in red overall got out and went into the house. It was one of the most prestigious and priciest home service companies in town. I was irritated to see it. I had really been pampering Felicia. I sent pictures of the car to Tessa, hoping she could question the maids once they returned to town. About half an hour later, the garage door opened, and the black Mercedes rolled out with two people in the front seats. I couldn't be 100% sure one of them was Felicia, and thanks to the tinted windows, my photos didn't help much either. I sent them anyway. Once the maids left, I texted Tessa, and she responded with a bit of humor, "How's my monkey in the tree doing?" I replied, "No bananas in a maple." The hours crawled by until around 1. At 30 minutes past the hour, the Mercedes returned and drove straight into the garage, offering no better glimpse of the occupants. Then, to my surprise, the front door opened, and Felicia walked out to the mailbox in white shorts and a matching top. I quickly snapped several clear shots and sent them to Tessa. She responded immediately, saying, "Stay calm and don't do anything stupid. Please stay where you are. We're on our way. The DA has approved the warrant, so we can go, and even if the dentist says no, I need you to stay put." Her message made it clear that Tessa was genuinely worried I might storm the house looking to teach the dentist a painful lesson. I'd certainly thought about it myself, but I knew it would only lead to trouble and possibly a hospital visit for the dentist, so I decided to follow the advice I'd been given. About 50 minutes later, two patrol cars rolled up to the house. One car parked near the garage, blocking the driveway. Tessa headed for the front door while a uniformed officer positioned himself near the garage. My birdwatcher friend, along with another officer, they headed toward the lakeside of the house, where the dentist kept his motorboat. Tessa rang the doorbell several times and waited a few minutes, but no one answered. She pulled out her cell phone and made a call, but still nothing. Finally, the uniformed cop got into his car, cranked up the loudspeaker, and blared, "Police. We know you're inside. You have 5 minutes to open the door or we'll break it down." He was waving his arms around a lot, but I couldn't hear what he was saying from where I was standing. I was pretty sure it wasn't anything like, "Please come in, dear friends." The commotion at the front of the house was getting pretty intense. Tessa went around to the back, and she came back a few minutes later with Felicia between her and the bird watcher. They led Felicia to Tessa's car and put her in the back seat with Tessa next to her. The bird watcher was up front. From what I could tell, Felicia had tried to make a run for the boat while the dentist was busy at the front door. Tessa's team had been ready for that trick 10 minutes later. Felicia stepped out of the car and went back into the house shortly after Tessa called. She said the case is closed, despite all the trouble Felicia had caused for everyone. Gwen, her parents, me, and the police. What Felicia did wasn't illegal. It's not a crime for an adult to abandon her family and move in with a lover, no matter how thoughtless the method. Felicia had convinced the police that she wasn't abducted or blackmailed. She had chosen this path willingly. I climbed down. From the tree, feeling drained, my bird-watching cop friend helped me gather the equipment and offered me a ride home in his patrol car. On the way, I called Gwen to tell her that I'd found her mom and that she was safe. I also called Felicia's parents to give them the news, but when I explained what she had done, they took it badly. I also made it clear that a divorce was inevitable. Before I got out of the car, the officer turned to me and said, "Tessa worked really hard on your case, and we're all glad she was right about you. I know you're." I was tempted to go back and give that guy a beating, but I didn't. Tessa likes you a lot, and any violence on your part would ruin that friendship. I nodded. I won't disappoint Tessa. To my surprise, Felicia came home right after me. She pulled up in the same black Mercedes, alone this time. After a brief exchange of words, she reviewed the divorce papers and accepted the terms without argument. The biggest shock came when she willingly gave me primary custody of Gwen. No protests, no fuss. It was almost too easy. I couldn't help but I wondered if she had any health or drug problems, so I asked her outright. She denied it, but instead offered up a whirlwind of nonsense to explain her actions. I pretended to be indifferent, though I was really fuming. The real reason for her disappearance, according to Felicia, was that her lover, who had a wife of his own, was planning to file for divorce. He wanted to sever all ties with his unfaithful wife while his own messy divorce played out to avoid further complications. He had accepted a 6-month dental job in Namibia, Africa, through our national foreign aid organization, Hope Works. Felicia was going to Namibia, Africa, to work on a dental job through our national foreign aid organization, Hope Works. She said she was going with him and that she was going to be his assistant. She said she would be well paid for the work. She said she needed intensive training for her new role because her lover had generously provided the training. She said she was afraid that if I had discovered her plans or whereabouts, I'd have gone after him and possibly prevented. It seems like she was testing me to see if she could be away from Gwen for an extended period. She only came home because the police told her she was safe with me. I couldn't hold back any longer. I can't believe this. Your lover is divorcing a shameless wife. And yet here he is, shacking up with someone just as bad. What does that mean? Felicia snapped. I didn't abandon her child or hide away with a lover. I shot back. Do you have any idea what could have happened to Gwen and me if the police and the media had decided I was responsible for your disappearance? I could have ended up in jail for weeks waiting for the truth to come out. Once we both calmed down, Felicia confessed that she and the dentist had only known each other for 2 months and had been sleeping together for just 1 month before she left. But despite the short time she said their love was strong enough to take the leap to Africa, she seemed shocked that the police had tracked her down. I played dumb and said I had no idea how they did it. Before Felicia left to visit Gwen and her parents, she promised to keep her phone on so Gwen and I could reach her. She also vowed to cooperate during the divorce process. After she left in that oversized Mercedes, I found myself I was sitting alone on the living room sofa, replaying everything in my mind. I kept asking myself what I could have done differently, but the truth was none of it mattered anymore. No matter how calm and composed I'd acted during our conversation, the fact was I was a wreck after she walked out. As if sent by fate, Tessa showed up at my door. Tessa understood what I was going through and stayed for a while to comfort me. Now that Felicia had been found, I thought it might be a good time to ask Tessa about her own personal life. After all, she already knew everything about me. She didn't mind and shared that she was a year younger than me, 34, and had been separated from her ex for 18 months before divorcing a year ago. She'd been working in our town ever since, and as for boyfriends, there were none in the picture. She then asked if I had spoken to Felicia yet. I took a deep breath to steady myself before answering. I haven't spoken to her yet. I told her that Felicia had come home briefly, signed the divorce papers, and granted me custody of Gwen because she was heading to Africa with her lover. Tessa locked eyes with me, her voice firm but caring. Please don't disappoint me by going back there for revenge. It's not worth it. Can you be honest with me and promise to let go of any stupid plans? I nodded. I promise. It's only because I appreciate everything you've done for me. I'd like us to remain friends. Friends, when all of this is behind us, she said, smiling softly. Don't worry. I'll be keeping an eye on you. You can call me anytime. That night, despite my best efforts to stay calm, sleep was elusive. It was a 65mm handgun with only 4 rounds. It wasn't much for a proper vendetta, but I figured it would do the job if I caught the dentist off guard. As soon as I arrived, though, things went south. The dentist was waiting for me, armed with a double-barreled shotgun. He opened fire as soon as I stepped out of the car. I fired 2 rounds, one that missed and one that grazed his arm and another that grazed his leg. He didn't seem to feel the pain, so I ran into the woods, and he chased me, still shooting until I tumbled down a ravine. That's when I woke up, lying on the floor, heart pounding. Even after the nightmare, my bruised male ego whispered that I ought to hunt down the dentist and beat the crap out of him for seducing my wife. But after some serious thought, I decided against it. The main reason was my promise to Tessa. I couldn't go back on that. If I went after him, he'd likely lose the job in Africa. I'd much rather see both him and my ex vanish to the other side of the world. I also realized that I didn't care much for Felicia and her lover. The price of revenge just wasn't worth it. Let them rot in Africa. The next day, Tessa stopped by again. She praised me for keeping my word and not resorting to violence. "I'm glad you let it go," she said. "It's better this way." I nodded, feeling lighter. I don't care anymore if that soiled dove and her gigolo dentist fly off to Africa. All that matters now is taking care of my daughter. "That's the right attitude," she replied. "Don't hesitate to reach out if you need help with anything. It's not easy being a single parent with a young daughter." "Thank you," I said, appreciating her more than ever. Gwen and I both appreciated very much. A few days later, someone at the police. I guess the story got out somehow. It was all over the tabloids. A parliament member's husband was having an affair with a married woman and planning to take her to Africa. There was a topless photo of Felicia and the dentist right next to paparazzi shots of the dentist's wife, also topless, getting cozy with her party boss. I figured the photo of Felicia had been taken by my bird watcher friend's camera, so I made a mental note to reward him with a nice bottle of malt. Despite the scandal, it wasn't easy to wash away 9 years of marriage. Even if it hadn't been perfect, there had been good times, and I felt a deep sorrow and emptiness, especially during the long, lonely nights. Pretending to be okay was exhausting, but thanks to Tessa, my friends, and my family, I slowly began to heal. Since signing the divorce papers, Felicia and I hadn't spoken much, just a few short text messages. I didn't ask about her. It was her parents who kept me informed about what she was doing. Up to that point, she had even sent Gwen a few postcards, but that was the extent of it. Tessa became a huge support for me, and before long, we were talking several times a week and even doing things together with our girls, which was great. Gwen and Astrid got along wonderfully. One Saturday, we decided to go on a shopping trip to the largest mall in the county, as both girls needed some new clothes. It was a bit of a drive from our town, so we planned for it to take up most of the day. Everything started off smoothly. I picked up Tessa and Astrid from their place, and we all piled into the car. Tessa, who usually wore jeans, had opted for a short skirt that showed off her legs. After a few miles on the road, she noticed my eyes wandering and teased, "Hey, don't stare at me. Keep your eyes on the road." This prompted giggles from the back seat, followed by Gwen's cheeky remark, "Be happy. He loves you more." Laughter filled the car. I glanced at Tessa, relieved to see her smiling brightly. Maybe it was a great day. She turned to me and asked, playfully, "Do you want to be my bridesmaid?" I grinned back, "Yes, very much." Another voice from the back seat chimed in, "Do you need 2 bridesmaids?" The car filled with laughter once more. Throughout the day, it became increasingly clear that we were functioning like a happy family. No one objected when I suggested we have some fun back at my place later in the evening. So, we stocked up on ingredients back at home. Gwen and Astrid took the lead in preparing the food, eager to show off. The evening was filled with laughter, games, and plenty of giggles. By the time dinner was done and the girls were settled, I managed to convince Tessa and Astrid to stay the night. After tucking the girls into bed, Tessa and I found ourselves in the living room with a bottle of my best Ria, some cheese and crackers, as we sipped our wine. Tessa broke the silence by asking if I missed Felicia. I thought for a moment before answering. I missed her, but not as much as I expected. Given everything that happened today, I didn't even think about her once. Tessa smiled. It was a great day for Astra and me too. What about your ex? I asked. Do you miss him sometimes? She admitted that she did, but less and less. Today, she said, she hadn't thought about him at all. Then, to my surprise, she leaned in and hugged me. She followed it with a soft kiss. After talking a bit more, we decided to call it a night instead of the spare room. Tessa opted to share the master bedroom with me. She slipped into one of my t-shirts as a makeshift nightgown. She put on a shirt as a makeshift nightgown and playfully asked, "Did you give me the shortest one on purpose?" I chuckled and said, "No need to hide those legs." She quickly added, "Sorry, my friend, but I'm in my most fertile time, and I don't take pills." I pulled her into a hug and kissed her gently. "I don't see any problem with my fertile period is actually an opportunity for us to become a real family. It would tie us all together." Tessa laughed. "Nice try," she said. "Think about it." I smiled. "You might just come around to the idea." We began kissing and getting closer, but before things went too far, Tessa stopped and said, "Too tired for that." "Don't worry, we'll have our time." "Good night, darling." "Good night, darling," I replied, though my mind was already thinking about the future and the promise of those later pleasures. At around 2 a.m, she shook me awake. "Are you sleeping?" she whispered. "Sleeping," I mumbled, groggily. "You just woke me up," she said. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about what you said," Tessa whispered, waking me from my half-sleep. "You were right about family, and now I agree with you about that baby. I think it's time for us to start working on it." I blinked a little, stunned, as her hand gently traced across my chest. She smiled at me with such warmth that I felt my heart skip a beat. "I love you, Tessa," I murmured, leaning in to kiss her softly. Before long, our kisses got deeper and our intimacy grew. I whispered, "I love you, Tessa," softly as she pulled me closer. We shared an intense connection, moving our bodies in sync, fueled by the passion we both felt. The moment built slowly, filled with tenderness, until we both reached a peaceful release. We lay together afterward, in quiet stillness. We were happy to be together. Afterwards, we lay side by side, catching our breath. We felt calm. I said again, "I love you, Tessa. Do you think you'd want to be married before we bring a baby into the world?" Tessa looked at me. Her eyes were wide with surprise. "Are you serious?" "You're serious?" I smiled at her. "Yes, Tessa, I'm serious." "Will you marry me?" She laughed, a sound filled with joy. "Of course I will. I love you so much." She kissed me once more, and the rest of the night we drifted between sleep and soft conversation, even sharing a quick moment of intimacy again in the early hours of the morning. Before the girls woke up, breakfast that day felt different. It was like we'd turned a new page in our lives. Tessa and I shared our news with Gwen and Astrid, and they were really excited. They were like, "We're going to be bridesmaids," in the weeks that followed. Things moved quickly. Felicia and I agreed to sell the house, and to our I was surprised at how much the bidding went up once the sale was complete. Once that was done, I transferred Felicia's share of the money to her account. Tessa and I decided to start fresh. She didn't want anything from my old house, so we auctioned off the furniture and most of the other belongings. We made more than we anticipated, which allowed us to plan for the future. Was a whole new ballgame. My only contact with Felicia was via email, which was just about wrapping up our financial matters. We didn't discuss anything personal, except for the odd question about Gwen. If she was curious about what was going on in our town, she could always check the local news online or ask her friends. From time to time, Felicia sent Gwen pictures and messages on Facebook. They mostly showed exotic animals and flowers from Africa. I wasn't sure if Gwen responded, but that was between them. Some odd rumors started circulating around town about Felicia and the dentist. One claimed that Felicia had gotten pregnant by a wealthy local man in Africa. I heard that the dentist had left her for a younger woman, but I didn't care much for gossip. In fact, I didn't believe it. No one spreading these stories had ever even been to Africa. Tessa and I, meanwhile, enjoyed a deeply fulfilling relationship. We shared a strong physical connection, but it was more than that. Our time together was filled with laughter, affection, and the sense that we were truly building something meaningful. We were really building something meaningful when Tessa discovered she was pregnant. All four of us were thrilled to welcome a new addition to our family. We found and purchased our dream house, and soon we were absorbed in planning renovations to make it our own. The wedding, which was initially meant to be a small, intimate affair, began growing in scope thanks to Tessa's mother is a corporate lawyer from a town 320 kilometers away. She's a real dynamo, full of ideas and energy. She even offered to pay for the entire wedding, which quickly ballooned into a much larger event than either of us had anticipated. We were worried about the size of the wedding, but we knew we had time. My divorce still needed to be finalized. The divorce was finalized, and that gave Tessa's mother plenty of time to add her own ideas to the planning. Life in our new blended family was better than we could have hoped for. The girls bonded like real sisters, and although they had their own interests, they shared a deep connection. Tessa and I both had been abandoned in our previous marriages, so we realized it was a blessing that rejection led us to find the right people and experience true love. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we learned to find a balance through compromise. I was certain that the woman I would soon marry was my ideal partner. We loved each other as much as we were loved in return.